Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to our three-way discussion here on Christian faith in the coronavirus era. My name is Tim Breen, and I serve as the lead pastor of First Reformed Church in Orange City. I'm joined by Travis Ells. Travis, tell us where you serve, in what capacity.
Yep, I am the executive pastor of preaching and care at First Reformed Church in Sioux Center, Iowa.
Excellent. And here with us is Pastor John Lee. John, tell us about your context and the role in which you serve.
Yeah, so John, pastor of Bethel Christian Reformed Church, also in Sioux Center. We have a pastor called senior pastor. Basically, I'm the only full-time pastor. So
that you are. Well, this conversation, which is going to play out in a few different parts, is sort of the follow-up to an in-person and impromptu conversation that Travis and I had just over a week ago, as we were talking about what we have learned in the midst of coronavirus, how we've become different leaders, how we've seen society change, and thought a little bit together about the implications for Christianity going forward. And both Travis and I thought we need to talk to John Lee, who's our good friend from Sioux County as well. John's a great thinker. What if we just kind of a free-flowing discussion around 4 different topics about Christianity in the coronavirus era? And so we're going to proceed through these one at a time. But I thought before we did that, I kind of wanted to hear from John and Travis about the moment, the watershed moment for you when you realized that coronavirus was going to have impact and transformation right here and in your life. I know that I had been reading a little bit at a corner of different web pages for a little while toward the end of 2019 and maybe in January of 2020. But for me personally, it was when there was that moment at Chesapeake Energy Arena and the NBA game was stopped because Rudy Gobert had tested positive for coronavirus, and kind of the markets really took a tumble about that time as well, because people could see this was going to have big time implications, not just in some distant part of China, but all around the world. Travis, when did you know this was going to be a big deal?
Yeah, Tim, same thing. I'd been reading some things throughout the latter part of 2019, and we go into the new year, and it seemed like there was something impending, and yet it felt like we were largely impervious to anything really terrible. And so I think it was as I was sitting, I was getting a haircut, and this must have been like the middle of March, early to mid-March. And I was watching ESPN, and it came on that Duke and Kansas, I think, had just withdrawn from the NCAA basketball tournament. I thought, whoa. I mean, the earth sort of shifted underneath my feet, because how badly could this be if this sort of national institution that is college basketball was going to just be shelved? And it was rather stunning. And so that was probably for me the moment. And I think even then I thought, a few weeks we'll get this figured out, and it'll just be, delay to the tournament, NBA season will go back again. And I've been constantly surprised that that's of course not at all what's happened, but this has been a prolonged and very serious pandemic.
No doubt. But you, John, when did you know that this was a biggie?
yeah, I mean, I like all news cycles, there was chatter about it, but most of January, of course, was subsumed with impeachment. So really February that I started to hear more. And I, at that point, was actually hoping to go to Turkey in the spring. So I was kind of looking a little bit globally, but Turkey had 0 cases, I think, in mid-February yet. So I thought, well, maybe it's going to be localized. I think for me, the week that it really all became real was the week of March 9. That Monday, we had a council meeting, and I had put together some contingencies on that Monday, and we had a staff meeting on the 10th. And that was still somewhat kind of forward picture. These things might happen. By the end of the week, of course, I think on that Saturday night, the governor said, no churches. Most of us still had it on the 15th. And I was actually going to go to Michigan for a week's vacation with family. It was even up to Sunday night, we still considered going. And then just even on that day, it became clear, like, we're not going to have church next Sunday. We need to refigure how we do ministry. And so I had to cancel the vacation. Really, as I was walking out of my evening service on the 15th, I still was thinking maybe I would go. And by the time I went to bed, I knew I couldn't. So that's really how quickly it came to my world.
Yeah, that weekend really was the seismic moment there, and I recall the very same thing, hearing that our governor here in Iowa had forbidden these large groups, and we just realized that means us. And so we tried our best to communicate to everyone not to come to church on the morning of March 15, and we got that word out to most of the people, but not all the people in our congregation. And so we still had a worship service, and we had just small little clusters of people spaced out throughout our sanctuary. But that definitely was the moment. That week of kind of March 9 to 15 was the week that the world changed in a way, from my perspective at least, that has not changed since September 11, 2001. That was a serious transformation. Well, one of the things that has become clear throughout this season of sheltering in place is that the old models of thinking about how the church should interact with the state have kind of come back to life again. There are questions that we weren't asking for a long time, especially here in our part of the United States, but those have surfaced again. People are acting with kind of attitudes of civil disobedience in some respect. Others are on the opposite side, saying trust the governing authorities, Romans 13 kind of stuff. So, John, what are maybe the questions that are front burner in your context and in your mind, and any resolutions you've arrived at as you've thought about how the church and civil authorities, municipal, state, local, national governments interface when maybe they have differing opinions on how society should be ordered or how people should be gathering?
You know, that's for me one of the most generative questions of the past couple of months, because there's not been a shared answer. If you look at some governors, even for example in Michigan, who's had pretty draconian rules from the very beginning, recognized there was a constitutional ability for churches to worship, and so that was not able to be rescinded. In Iowa, our governor initially did forbid Christian or any faith-based services, but then has since backtracked from that, right? So I think civil governments are learning as they go. If you look at the national government, the AG has been intervening in some of these cases. So this is at the court level, at the legislative level, and at the church level. We're all trying to figure out where is that intersection. You know, for me, what's been interesting, I think, as a pastor, I would agree that probably the governor shouldn't say faith communities can't meet. But I think now I'm seeing my conservative colleagues say, well, since the governor has lifted that, that means we can meet. In other words, they're still looking to the governor for their authority. And I would say, no, we have to self-police. And I think that's where our constitutional system would point us to. The key text, of course, is Romans 13. And I have a colleague in the region who he understands that he would say it's not obeying governing authorities, it's obeying the Constitution, which is the authority over our authorities. And so if they're infringing upon the Constitution, Romans 13 would still point us to disobey them because we have a higher authority on the civic level. Of course, that same person talked about, I'm going to quote him, the feminized, subservient Western church led by hirelings trembling in a fetal position was how he referred to his colleagues who would not do civil disobedience. And so I think within the church, you've got these different models of what it means to be a courageous leader. And yeah, it's been very interesting as I worked with my own counsel and with colleagues about how we answer that. I got more thoughts, but Travis, like, what did you think? What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the rub, right? It's this tension that exists within a democracy. It would be so much easier if it was, you know, the party that was saying, well, you have to do this and we'll shoot you if you don't, or even the king. But, you know, what does that look like and how is it played out? I think, you know, people, especially in our neck of the woods, they have a little bit of a suspicion, or maybe a lot of suspicion, about federal government, and so look to the state. And in our case, Governor Reynolds has been fairly loose with everything, these restrictions, but they're certainly not mandated. And so we even look to the local level, and it becomes up to the community. You know, one of the things I think that I had noted, maybe Tim, in our conversation, was simply that this is the difficulty of our reality today in a nation where we are connected, and yet we're still separate by geography, and certainly in so many ways by culture and general philosophy of life, and these are huge generalizations, of course, but we're simply going to have a different view of this here in Sioux Center, Iowa, than someone probably living in Manhattan is going to have of it. And so for there to be like formulate cookie cutter federal mandates, I think there's a reason to be suspicious of those and to be quite wary. At the state level, I think we need to pay attention and appreciate that what is being suggested in the way of restrictions or protocols is intended for the benefit of all people. But at the end of the day, we also have to appreciate that it does come down to personal responsibility and how do we best love our neighbor within this. And I don't know. So civil disobedience, I'm not even that interested in this conversation of civil disobedience and sticking it to the man and all that stuff. Like, no, maybe worry less about that and be more concerned with how your neighbor across the street or across town is doing, and what can you do to love and serve them in the midst of all this.
What I would add to that, is, to bring this down from an abstract into, how we love our neighbors, right? So my wife is an occupational therapist, and she's deemed an essential worker. As a pastor, none of the three of us are deemed essential workers. And during these past couple of months, I've had, I just did a funeral this morning. We have a funeral on Friday at my church. Did a funeral a couple of weeks ago, and marriage is in crisis, and just life is happening, and in some ways more acutely struggling than in other seasons. And to say that, my wife, who cares for people with tendons that are stretched, that's an essential thing that the government will allow, and those risks are worth taking as a society, but that the intangibles of a soul, of even civil goods that you can recognize, like marital thriving, care and comfort for those who are facing medical crises, right? That those things aren't essential. I mean, I think it's very dangerous when a state begins to wade into determining those things. And especially as you look at some of the strictures that have been placed on faith communities, the state has a compelling interest, but they have to do it in the least restrictive manner. And I think at times we've seen it hasn't been the least restrictive manner. And you want to love your neighbor, but when the state doesn't allow faith communities, including faith leaders and professionals, to do that, that's when I think, for me, the question becomes germane.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and certainly Christianity has erred too far on the side of Gnosticism, where we've thought only about the soul and not the body. And in this case, the pendulum seems to be arcing back in the other direction, the way we perceive it. That the care for the body. There was a great political cartoon where someone had a church and they stuck a Walmart sign on front of it and said, therefore now it's essential, because in care, food is important, and medical care is important, and we affirm that. We don't believe, but kind of a holistic Christian understanding would recognize that we are not solely molecular. We're not solely anatomical or kinesiological bodies, but we're also people with sort of a self that arises out of or even lives within our bodies too, and that requires care. And it's why I have recoiled a little bit from this language that pits us as a medical wellness versus economic wellness. It's
right.
Not just economical, it's sociological wellness. The exchange of currency matters, but so does being able to hug your grandchildren, or go to the beach or worship. And so we have to not just make this about the bottom line or a spreadsheet. It's about what it means to be human and to take all those things into consideration. Travis, a final thought or two from you?
So, well, I mean, I guess the only other thing that comes to mind is, I think it's important to extend an enormous amount of grace for those at every level of government, within our churches, within our business communities, and so on and so forth. I think people are really trying, right? And what we're all trying to find is this place in between. And, we've kind of gotten caught up with the scientific community is saying this one thing about this hideously nasty virus that it has the potential to really kill people. And so everything gets moved kind of that way. And there's then, of course, a reaction to that too. Well, we can't trust the scientists. No, actually, I think we can and should trust the scientists, but we can't limit it to just that discussion. We also probably better be asking the economists and the sociologists and faith leaders and business leaders. So it can be a little bit more of a fully orbed argument that does address each component of life, because we are more than just material beings. We're not less than that, but we are certainly more than that. And so, yeah, because I am convinced that we're all trying to come to this sort of place in the middle where we have all these considerations in mind, and hopefully we'll do and implement practices that will be most beneficial to the most people.
Well, this has been great. Christian Faith in the Political Order, Part 1. Thank you so much, Travis and John. I'll be back with Part 2 next.